So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Elaine Silverstein. She's a certified in sustainable landscape management by the New York Botanical Garden. She has also earned the Urban Naturalist certificate and continues to study botany, ecology, and landscape design. She maintains a horticultural practice in Bergen County, where she advises clients on sustainability, garden design, and installing and caring for native plantings. She is a vice president of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey and co-leader of the Bergen-Passaic chapter. She lives in Glen Rock, where she is a member of the Environmental Commission. If you have questions during Elaine's presentation, please put them in the Q&A, and then I'll present them to Elaine at the conclusion, and she'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And I'm going to start. They're going to talk about three native plants in three different kinds of settings. Native plants in small areas, but in three different kinds of settings tonight. Native plants in pots, a 3-square-foot garden, a very small garden, and small borders and tree islands. So we're going to be getting larger as we go through the evening. So starting with growing native plants in containers. Just going to let you look at this nice combination of containers here. What I have found about growing native plants in containers is that you're much better off if you put one plant in each container than you are if you try to mix them. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit. So you see this nice combination of pots here. Okay, so almost any native plant can be grown in a container as long as the container is the right size. Obviously, you're not going to put a tree in a little pot, and you're not going to put a very small plant in a very big container. I have found that the pot is more likely to suffer from temperature extremes than the plant. A lot of pots cannot take a really cold winter or the extreme, getting very hot, getting warmer and colder the way our winters sometimes do. They'll chip and crack. And terracotta pots, don't get expensive ones, because terracotta pots generally don't last more than, say, 10 years maximum outdoors. Basically, the best way, I think, to grow native plants in pots, say on a patio or by your front door or something like that, is to mass the pots for the best effect. But it is different from planting native plants in the ground. And here are some things to think about when you put native plants in pots. You want to pick a weatherproof container, obviously, or one that will last a reasonable amount of time. These were very expensive terracotta pots. I was very pleased. I think they're very beautiful. They were quite expensive, and they're going through their first winter now, and I'm happy to say they look really good, even though the weather's been quite cold, but they don't all look really good after a cold winter. Drainage is critical. You must have drainage holes in the bottom of your pot, as well as shards that will keep the water from the water from getting stuck inside the pot. You want to pick plants with similar requirements. You want to pick plants that all like a dry, sunny site, for example. The plants, unlike native plants planted in the ground, they may well need fertilizer. It depends on the potting mix you use. And they will certainly, in the summertime, need very frequent watering. It may be more than once a day. You need to be aware of that. When you put plants in pots, grooming is really important. In other words, you want to keep picking off the dead leaves and the dead flowers, which you probably won't do in your garden as much. Crowding is good. Crowding is good in a garden too, but I think it's particularly good when you have plants in a pot. You want to avoid plants with strong vertical growth. In other words, don't put in any sunflowers. Don't put in any, there are other species that get to be 6 to 8 feet tall. Don't put those in the pots. You want to what I found, and I planted this is the same pot at two different times in the summer. I had never put native plants in pots before, except for the ones that seed themselves into my herb pots, and I had sort of just left them. So I had never grown native plants in pots before I was asked to give this talk. So I did a couple of pots last spring, and I got some interesting results, things that don't happen when you plant plants in the ground. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. They may look good for only part of the season. And that's something to think about. In other words, they may look better in the spring or in the summer and not look good throughout the season. And the plants may behave a little bit differently than you expect. So this pot, can you see my pointer? This pot, I planted this in the spring, I think in May of last year, and they're all plants from my garden. So we're going to talk later about the thrillers and the spillers and the fillers, but you can see you have a nice mix of plants here. I've got little blue stem in the back. I've got some penstemon, and because it was May, it was just coming into bloom. This is sundrops as a filler. This is the native wild onion. This is a Rudbeckia. You can see the sundrops, some of the sundrops is blooming. And this is purple poppy mallow, again, also as a spilling over the side. So I planted this in May, and I thought it was really nice and full and that it looked great. This is what it looked like. And I also picked plants from my garden. All the plants were dug from my garden, from the ground. And they were all plants. I picked things that were small on purpose because some of these plants get to be very, very large. So I picked smaller individuals. Well, what I got by August, and I was very disappointed, was this. It didn't fill in nicely. It grew straight up. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. The shorter plants that were supposed to be growing and filling in didn't. And basically I had this really very uninteresting, and they got all out of proportion. The onion, the nodding pink onion, should not be taller than the Rudbeckia, obviously. So I don't quite know why. Everything was healthy and green. It wasn't a lack of fertilizer, but they didn't behave the way they would have behaved in the ground. And that's something to keep in mind, which is another reason why I say the best way to do this is probably to have one plant in each pot. And then you can move them around and change your arrangements. So let's move on. If you do want to put mixed species pots together, and these are simply pictures that I found on the internet. There's not a lot about native plants in containers out there. There's one very good book, and I'll give you that at the end of this section. But you always want to have more plant than pot. You want to have a nice crowded mass of plants. Generally, you include 3 types of plants, and this is true of any pot that you plant. Thrillers, which are tall, showy plants. Fillers, which are plants that fill the gaps, but they're going to be vertical. And spillers, trailing plants. And this, again, this is true for all different kinds of plants. This is kind of a mishmash, I think. There's mountain mint in here, purple coneflower, lanceolea coreopsis. There's a sunflower in here. And side oats grama is the grass. So they're kind of I don't know. I'm wondering if it's really possible to get a pot of mixed native plants that looks great throughout the season. Some design ideas when working with native plants. Again, a grouping of plants in a patio looks really nice. And this, I think, is Fothergilla. And this is an Itea, I think, and I'm not sure what this is. It looks like it might be a geranium, but I'm not positive what that is. The way I had always used pots before, and this is just a corner of my patio, it's where I put my herbs and a few annuals to draw pollinators to the herbs. So again, a massing of pots, and there are different plants in the different pots, but it's just a mass of pots. Looks really nice, I think. This, I think, is a lovely idea. I happened to be in southern France last spring, and this, I believe, was in Alba. They have they have beautiful floral displays everywhere in the cities there, but they had these are hollowed out stone blocks filled with a mix of annuals, and you can see the diversity there, and that they are using the thrillers and the fillers and the spillers here. And it's just, these were everywhere, and they just looked absolutely fantastic. Just as an idea, these are kind of, I think, jokes, just pictures that I've taken traveling of how to use pots. This would have been in southern Spain. Boy, do they use plants in pots, and they look fantastic everywhere. And the same thing you can do a patio and just fill it with pots like that, and it looks wonderful. This is a pot of native plants, and for me, it's covered, and I can't see it now, but it looks like I think I like this picture because it shows how the grasses or perhaps the sedges work, which are very important to include for contrast and to fill in. Here are some examples of fillers and spillers. Just about any tall plant can be a thriller, can be your tall plant. But of course, as I said before, you don't want to get anything that gets to be too tall, and you may want to wind up giving it a chop at some point. So for fillers, for things to just fill in nicely, fill in the pot nicely, sedges work, short grasses, nodding pink onion, which looks like a grass when it comes up, threadleaf or lanceleaf coreopsis, crested iris, and sundrops. All work, I mean, there are others, but these are all plants that will be nice fillers for sunny areas. Spillers, and I think this is the best one of all, purple poppy mallow. It's just a fantastic plant. I grew it for the first time last year in the ground and in that pot, and it reblooms in the fall. It's just absolutely beautiful. Purple poppy mallow, which is also good at the front of a border like this. Wild strawberry, our native petunia, which is Ruellia humilis, has lavender flowers, and barren strawberry. So those will all drape gracefully. And so those are just some examples of fillers and spillers for sun. And here are some resources for, as I said, I didn't find much, but this book is fantastic. She covers everything I'm going to talk about tonight, at least as well as I'm going to do it, probably much better. It's a very small book, and you can get that on Amazon. Or just Google it, and you will find the book, Native Plants for the Small Yard by Kate Brandis. Just a terrific book. There is a website, or probably just a few pages on a website, about container gardening from the Missouri Botanical Garden. There is an Audubon webpage. And then this is from a commercial site, Direct Native Plants, but they do have some information about container gardening with native plants. So again, looking at individual plants in individual pots, I would say is the way to go, and I think these look great. Okay. I think I'll take all questions at the end rather than stopping at the end of each section. So the 3 square foot garden, I think, is an idea of my own, and I have found it to be a very effective way to get people started with native plants because it works on a very small scale. So, for example, suppose you have a small sunny spot. That's 3 square feet, really small. Or suppose you have a place where you can get rid of 3 square feet of lawn. Plant one milkweed, and in this case, we're talking about a moist site, one milkweed, one native grass, so this is red milkweed or Asclepias incarnata. This is panic grass, Panicum virgatum, and New England aster, all adapted to full sun and moist sites. Plant these 3 plants, preferably as plugs or divisions. I'm going to show you how quickly divisions fill in a little bit later in this section. And you will have blooms from May through October. You will get pollinators by just incredible numbers of pollinators. And all of these plants are also important host plants. So this is a really good way to start off with native plants yourself or to encourage other people to start off. Because it just covers all those bases. They're all also very, very easy plants to grow. So these are specifically for a moist site, although the red milkweed, the red or swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, and New England aster are not fussy about soil at all. They can be grown in dry sites at all, too, not just on moist sites. But if you have a dry site, a really dry site that's in full sun, you can do it this way. You can plant orange butterfly milkweed. You can plant little blue stem grass, and you can plant smooth aster. And these are, again, same, all plants from the same genuses are very closely related groups. The grasses are not the same genus, of course. But they fill the same function in the garden. They're all important pollinator plants, important host plants. They will fill that 3 square foot space. They won't get too tall. And you will have a garden quickly if you start with plugs or with small plants. In all these cases, there are other plants you could try, but again, these will give you bloom from usually around late May well into October. So why would you do this? Where would you do this, of a 3 square foot garden? First of all, as I said before, it's a great start for a new gardener. You could give somebody these 3 plants as divisions from your garden probably very easily, or you could just buy 3 plants. It's a really inexpensive introduction to natives, and next year you will have seeds and divisions. These plants tend to fill in very quickly. You can say in your front yard, you could plant a very small area like this. It would look neat, and it would perhaps serve to familiarize the folks in the neighborhood with native plants. Again, you could do this in pots, on a patio, along a fence or walkway, under a tree, as a lawn island, or to extend an existing border. I have a couple of places in my garden where every year I just get rid of, I make it a little wider, like 1 foot wider, by getting rid of some more lawn, digging up some more lawn. And it's about 3 square feet every year. So I just keep putting in new divisions. So, and it's easy to do, and the garden gets bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. You can do this on a very small scale. It's really not necessary to think in terms of large scale and many, many plants when you're getting started with native plants. There are lots of plants you could use. I've talked so far about a very sunny site. But there are lots of plants that you could use for dry sites. For example, this is a garden that is in dry shade, almost complete shade. It's actually along my front walkway. And in May, as you can see, it has native columbine and native geranium. There are also shade asters in here that will bloom in August and September. They're mixed in. There are quite a few other plants in here, but there are ferns in here. There are lots of really beautiful shade asters and shade goldenrods. in many, many different shades of colors, and they spread beautifully. They don't tend to get terribly aggressive. They spread beautifully, they fill in, and they look really nice for years and years and years to come. So that's a good way to do it with shade asters and shade goldenrods, and just put in one or two things that are going to bloom in the spring as well, and maybe ferns to just kind of fill in the gap, evergreen ferns like Christmas fern. If you have moist sites, a moist site, there are just dozens of plants. Most of the spring ephemerals, the plants that we refer to as spring ephemerals, the plants that that bloom and that come up, set bloom and set seed before the trees leaf out, they tend to be plants of moist sites. So if you just look up spring ephemerals, you get a huge list of plants. Pachyra aurea is a terrific plant for moist shady sites. There are many, many sedges that work. This is a picture that was taken along the Appalachian Trail in Vernon, New Jersey. And there are at least, it's a fantastic place for seeing native spring ephemerals. And there are at least half dozen plants here. There's a yellow violet, there's Dutchman's breeches, there's other violets. This is false Solomon seal. There's many, many plants here. So you can see how that combination works in nature. So you could easily, these plants are small, so you can easily do that in a area that's only 3 or 4 square feet. But if you do go with spring ephemerals, you want to remember to overplant with something that will bloom or at least stay green throughout the season, so to avoid empty spaces where weeds would come take over if you had empty spaces in your garden. So this is, I've mentioned a couple of times that it's a really good idea to start either from the small plugs that you get from native plant suppliers, which in many cases will bloom the first year, but not in all cases. Or what works even better is divisions from your garden. In other words, pop out a plant in early spring, divide it, put some of it back, and then take the divisions, the rooted divisions that you have, and put them somewhere else. This is a demonstration garden that was done in front of Glen Roxborough Hall in, I would say, 6 or 7 years ago now. This it was planted in April, mid-April, and these are all divisions, just divisions from my garden. The DPW director marked off this site for me, and this is an area that until recently would just be planted over and over again with annuals every spring and summer. So I planted it in mid-April. By early June, I had this. As you can see, the coreopsis and the penstemon are already blooming. Other things are coming up nicely. By mid-July, whoops, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, by mid-July, it was all filled in and other things were starting to bloom. You can see there's bergamot blooming here. The milkweed, some of the milkweed was blooming. This is really the fastest way to get milkweed to bloom. New plants of milkweed to bloom, and it's nice and full. And by fall, it was glorious. It was, look at the asters. And the coreopsis is still blooming. The grasses had come up. So this is probably about, this little block is probably 3 by 3. So I think there might have been 9 plants in it. Not 9 species, but 9 plants. So you can see that in this very small area, it's not 3 square feet, it's 9 square feet, but in this very, oh, I said it was 4 by 4. So let's say that that's what it was, about 16 plants, but still a very small area. And you have this just explosion of growth from, from this to this in one season. So that is the 3 square foot garden, which I hope you find useful. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to concentrate on small scale borders and tree islands. Okay, so most gardens really start small. My own garden, the gardens I design, my friends' gardens, they really are not one big design. We tend to have small properties where I live and where I work, and they really are a series of small gardens making up one big garden. So if you think about them that way, you can. I always think it's easier to start small and not think about planting a huge area all at once. Um, this is my backyard, and if people have heard me speak before, they've probably seen this picture because I use it as an illustration for a lot of things. So over here and over here, there are two relatively small scale native plant gardens, sunny borders. And that's what I'm mostly going to be talking about for the rest of this session. Sunny borders. Everything here was planted. Um, we've been in our house quite a while, but every single thing you see was planted. This was just lawn when we bought the house. So where would you put a small garden? You could put a small garden right in the middle of a lawn as an island. You could put it around a mailbox or light post. You could put it in a corner. You could put it around a tree. You could put it along the border of your property. You could put it along the sidewalk or in the hill strip or in any narrow, unused strip of grass. I'm sure everybody can think of other ways to do this, and you can extend an existing border. These pictures are show the front of the house, and this was a small garden that was originally planted. It has some trees, and it was a shade garden because back here was an old, I think you can see the trunk, there was a huge Norway maple, which now has gone down in a storm. But gradually, this small garden was extended along the front of this house until this is what you now have. There's a path here that you can't see because of all the growth. There's a front path. This is the hill strip, which was not planted because people have to walk somewhere and they don't want plant. And as you can see, this is kept groomed so that the plants are not flopping on people, but it's very shady. It's planted with ground cover, with shrubs, and with small trees. And it is very attractive. It blooms throughout the growing season. It has a lot of the shrubs make fruits for birds. It's sort of part of a very active ecosystem in a front yard. As you can see, originally there was a lot more lawn in this front yard than there is now. This is only it's maybe 10 feet deep. So there's still quite a bit of front lawn in back of it, although the effect is to close in the front yard. And it was originally planted on this side and not on this side because because the hill strip has the wires above it. So I did not want the town to plant a tall, at the time, the town would still plant tall trees under wires, which is just not good for the trees or for anything. So I didn't want them to plant a tree, so I planted the other side. So it would be obvious that I didn't want a tree there. The town is now planting short trees under wires, so I could have saved my money and not planted, and I could have had trees here. So but anyway, but this is it's an interesting border. It has lots of different species in it, and it's very attractive to birds actually. So those are all the places you can put a garden like that. So these are just some examples of site selection. Kind of repetitive of the previous site, but this also shows some places where this kind of thing has been done. So if you can extend, which is what this shows, you can extend an existing shrub border by planting perennials in front of it. So this was a design for a house that had an existing shrub border, front steps, pathway, and then we designed a perennial garden in front of it. this was, and also I remember I gave the client, the driveway's over here, and I remember I gave the client an option to extend this all the way down the side of the house, which I'm not sure if they did. I don't think they did it, but they did plant this. So that's how you take an existing shrub border in front of a house and plant in front of it to have more variety and a great deal more habitat. You can create a new border either freestanding or against the house or around a tree. This was a friend who said to me, oh, I'm so annoyed the grass won't grow in my front lawn. So I went and I looked and I said, well, the grass won't grow because grass won't grow in the shade. So let's make those tree islands bigger. The original tree island was this big, and you can see we made it this big. And I can't say I agree with what she planted. And certainly I would have approached it, designed it, and planted it differently. But she was happy because she no longer had these bare spots in her lawn. This was the beginning of a garden that was going to be planted around a lamppost. And this is a garden that was planted. This big old Norway maple died. It was cut down. And we left the stump because stumps are really good for wildlife. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. The stumps are very good for wildlife. Planted another tree, and then what happened here was this is a swamp white oak. Now, my soil is not right for swamp white oaks. My soil is dry and sandy. But a swamp white oak was the only tree I could find it was a beautiful, healthy, attractive tree. It was formed nicely. It was native. It was native to this area, so I took it. I couldn't get what I wanted, which would have been a silver maple or an elm, or anyway, the trees that I wanted that were better for my site were not available to me. So I planted the swamp white oak. And then because the soil wasn't really right for it, the soil was much too sandy, I put down a ring of compost around the tree for, I believe, 2 years in a row. That's the only thing I did to amend the soil. And the tree was planted about 10 years ago, and it's healthy and beautiful. It's done really well. But in that compost, it was my compost. And in that compost were lots and lots of seeds of native plants. So suddenly I had a garden around the tree. So I said, oh, so I've got a garden there. So let's extend the garden around the stump as well. So we have a big kidney-shaped garden in the front of the house that it gets a great deal of sun. Although as the maple gets bigger, I'm going to have to switch to shade plants over here. So that's probably going to happen this year. So these are all just places that you can do this. Another great idea is to link several trees into a tree island. In other words, if you have 2 trees on your lawn or 3 trees growing rather close together, mulch all around all of those trees and then underplant in the with shade-loving shrubs and perennials. In nature, trees don't come sticking out of a lawn. They like to have plants growing around them. They'll do much better. You can create a focal point where one perhaps didn't exist. If you just had a post like this, then you can create a focal point around it. So basically, what all of these things are doing is they are eliminating lawn and adding habitat, but in a small and manageable way. These are not big gardens. They're not hard to install, and they don't take a lot of work to maintain. Okay, site preparation. I'm a great believer in doing as little as possible. I never amend the soil. You want to choose the plants that grow in the soil you have, no matter how poor that soil seems. There are many native plants that will do well in very poor soil. To kill lawn, the simplest way to do it is to, and this is not what you're going to hear from anybody else or you're going to read on the internet, but the simplest way to kill lawn, particularly if you're working in a small manageable area, Mow it as short as possible. Put down a thick layer of mulch, and I have found that the best mulch is shredded cedar or hemlock bark. This will, so by a thick layer, I mean 2 or 3 inches. The grass will die, and then you plant right through the mulch and dead turf. You will never have to mulch it again because the plants will fill in and they will serve as living mulch in the future. Do not rototill if you have, particularly if you have a lawn. But any area, if you want to put in a vegetable garden, anything like that, don't rototill. Tilling releases carbon. Soil is a carbon sink. So when you till, you release carbon. It causes erosion and it brings the weed seeds to the surface. It also confuses the soil insects very badly because soil insects all live at a certain level. They live at a certain layer in the soil. They each have their own level that they that is the right habitat for them. When you till, you mix everything up and they've all got to find the right level again. It's just a mess. So don't till. Both solarizing and the lasagna method are unnecessary and possibly harmful to the soil and the organisms living in it. And please, whatever you do, don't put down a thick layer of wood chips on top of cardboard, which is what everybody does. Absolutely not necessary. The wood chips are not the best soil amendment. They take longer to break down than the shredded bark does. The shredded bark will be a little bit more expensive, but if you're working in a small area, it's not a big deal. So that is how you prepare a site for planting. So the best time to do that is in the fall, and then the grass will die over the winter, and you plant in the spring, in early spring. Okay. Direct seeding a native plant garden, don't do it. Particularly if native plants are relatively new to you. Most of the native plants that we like, the perennials and the grasses, need time to develop very extensive root systems, very big, deep root systems. They don't do that in a single season, and they don't pop up quickly in the spring. If you seed, you are going to get tiny little seedlings, mostly in May. By that time, the weeds will have overtaken the site. They will always outcompete native perennials and grasses. They simply grow faster. In order to establish a garden from seed, you need to follow a very specific protocol, which is going to involve using herbicides to kill the existing the existing weeds in the soil. There are two good sources to read about that. One is on the Prairie Nursery website. Prairie Nursery is an old and very reputable native plant nursery located in Wisconsin, and mail order nursery. It is called Establishing a Garden from Seed, and it's on their website. And there's a I've given you the source here, and or also Larry Weiner's book Garden Revolution will explain how to do this and how hard it is to do. There are other sources as well. So you want to start your garden with small plants or plugs, not seed. You cannot scatter some seeds on the ground and get a native plant meadow. It doesn't work that way. It's really a complicated process to establish a garden from seed. You're sort of you're leaving yourself open to disappointment if you do it. I hear this all the time that I'm going to scatter some seeds and you're going to get a garden, but you're not. Start from plugs or small plants or divisions if you're lucky enough to get them from a friend or a neighbor. And by the way, the Bergen-Passaic chapter, which is sponsoring my talk tonight, always holds a plant swap in the spring. We haven't scheduled it yet, but it's usually in May, and those are divisions, and you will get them and they will grow quickly. So that really is the way to do it. Okay, just a few things about design considerations. If you're establishing a new garden, you may feel a little bit bewildered. So like, where do you get started? What do you do first? What do you think about first? So You want to think about what you want it to look like. Basically, a garden can be up against a house or it can be freestanding in some way. I've given you examples of both. I do these on graph paper, as you can see here. And you can see two different examples. The one on top is a garden that's it's a front border along a house, and the one on the bottom is a kidney-shaped garden that was freestanding. You want to think about, first of all, how much sun is it going to get and where is the sunlight coming from? You want to, a south, the sun is in the south. We're in the northern hemisphere. The sun is in the south. You're going to get the most sun on the south side of a building or on the south side of a tree. The north side of a house is always going to be shadier. You need to think about that before you pick your plants. You want to plan for a succession of bloom. You want things to bloom from spring through fall. The fourth dimension in any garden is always time. How tall should the plants be? How many plants? And the graph paper is very useful for that, because generally speaking, if 1 square of the graph paper is 1 square foot, that's one plant. That works nicely. Do you want to hide the view? Do you want to frame it? Do you want the garden to look formal or informal? What kind of spacing do you want to use? You want to use curved edges because they draw the eye into the design and along the design, whereas straight lines stop your eye from moving. This is not a design program, but these are the considerations that you think about when you start to design a garden. I do programs on design, but and I do design gardens, but that's not the main focus. But these are all important considerations when you start to design a garden. So a freestanding garden. So this is an oval that was meant to be in the center of a lawn. It's a sunny, moist site. It's approximately 12 by 15 feet and placed in existing lawn. And as I said, it goes down to a stream. It's quite a moist site. It's freestanding, which means it's meant to be viewed from any angle. That's something I should have pointed out in the preceding slide. So this garden, because it's against the house, you're going to look at it only from this direction. This garden, sorry again, I keep doing that. This garden, because it's freestanding, you're going to walk around it. This freestanding garden does have shrubs on one side, tall shrubs on one side, and that's for a very specific reason. This is a busy street out here. It's in the middle of a lawn, but this is a busy street. So there are shrubs to screen to some extent, and also the sun is coming from that direction. So the perennials are in front of that. It's a little bit different from other freestanding gardens. In this one is designed to be somewhat symmetrical, although it's meant to have a natural look, because you can walk around the entire garden. So it is bilaterally symmetrical. In other words, you can divide it this way or this way, and there will be approximately the same. It includes grasses as well as flowering perennials. And one of the main things this garden does is it uses one of the most useful plants that I've ever come up with, which is golden groundsel, which is this plant here, Pachyra aurea, golden groundsel. This is one of the few plants that I have discovered that can push back against lawn. Because if you have a freestanding garden in a lawn, the lawn is always going to encroach on the garden, and you're going to find that the rhizomes come in and the grass is growing up, and you have to keep pulling it out, and you have to keep pushing back on that. I haven't found anything that will actually hold the grass back. It's very determined, but Pachyra aurea will actually push back against grass and can hold its own. So it's I've got it all around here. It was particularly in a moist site where everything is going to grow really, really well. It's a great thing to use as a border. It's mixed with some other things in this particular border, but it's the main thing that's helping the garden to stay a garden and not be overgrown by the lawn. Okay, So planting and growth of a small garden. This was a garden that was installed in front of a synagogue in Ridgewood. And these concrete barriers are functional. They're there to stop trucks from attacking the building, obviously. And we planted a small perennial garden inside it based on just from divisions, mostly from my garden. And this is what it looked like. It was bare soil when we planted it, all done by volunteers. This is what it looked like probably a month or so later. And this is what it looks like in late summer every year. So again, fills in quickly, particularly with divisions. If we had used plugs, probably this would have been more like second year growth. You can see all this milkweed bloomed the first year. With plugs, some things will bloom the first year. A lot of asters will, in particular, but and some grasses even. But you're not, you can't be sure that everything will bloom. With divisions, almost everything will bloom the first year. So again, if you can go to a plant swap in the spring, that's a great source of plants. Another thing that I like to do, which makes a garden small that might necessarily actually be small, is to design modules rather than the entire garden. So a module is a piece of a garden. So this is a garden that was planted against a house, as you can see. It faces south. And the way it's quite a long area. It's probably 60 or 70 feet. It was a few years ago. I don't remember exactly. But the way I designed it was as a module. So so the idea was that the module curves, so you would have this nice sinuous line like that along the garden. They didn't really do it that way, but but that was the idea. Nice curve, nice sinuous curve, S-shaped curve along the front of the garden. But the module makes it nice and easy and small. The module is about 10 feet wide by about 6 feet. I think it's smaller. Yeah, I think it's about 10 by 6. So that's not a big area to plant. If you think of it in terms of planting one module or maybe two modules the first year, do it that way. The second year, you may very well get enough plants for free to plant the third and the fourth module. You certainly will get enough plants in future to do that. So it's another way to take a big area and make it a small area that is manageable and easy to design. Again, taller plants in front, shorter plants in back. This is what it looked like the first year, summer after planting, and this is what it looked like I didn't get to see it till very late summer, the third year, so most of the bloom is gone, but as you can see, it filled in really nicely by the second year. This is in Ridgewood. Okay. All right. I just want to talk, as you can see from most of the designs that I've shown you and most of the pictures I've shown you, I am a great believer in close planting. In other words, planting everything very close together. Nature does abhor a vacuum. You will never see an empty space without plants in nature. It doesn't happen. Even if you have a very, very arid area, after a rain, things are just gonna, there's always plants there, there's seed, there's stuff there. Plants are gonna come up. This is one very small section of of a perennial border in my backyard. And it's the same section in June, in I believe September, probably late August or early September, and then in the winter. Now, in the meantime, I'm really sorry about that. No, I don't want to do that. Oh, how do I lost my slides. There it is. Okay. So again, the same section, I did the same section of the same garden in the same year. I did not plant anything in between pictures 1 and 2. You can see the grass that's here. Here it is. It's just starting to come up. These plants are you can't see them anymore. They're still there. And in you can't see them in this picture, but you do see here are New England asters that were not obvious there. And then in the winter, this is basically a big bird feeder in the winter. I have a lot more birds in my garden in winter than in summer. So close planting does a lot of things. It mimics nature. That's how plants grow in nature. It cuts way, way down on weeding. It prevents flopping. It provides habitat for wildlife. It allows you to plant more plants and a greater variety of species. Diversity is always good. And it gives winter food and cover for wildlife. So it doesn't have to be as quite as natural looking as this. You can do it in drifts of color. I tend to design more in a random way, in a more naturalistic way, but you can certainly do drifts of color or of height or of anything or any way you can do a more formal design, but we're still doing close planting. It's something that I just think is very important to point out anytime that you're working with native plants. And just as a last little section, when I'm out in nature, I like to think about the way nature arranges plants and how you might mimic that in a garden. So this is the top, we're on the top of a mountain in Maine. And if you look at this little section, I mean, it's hemmed in by rocks. It's a small garden. It's probably 10 feet by 15 or 20 feet. And it's totally hemmed in by the fact that there's no soil around it. So this is the only place that these plants could take hold and grow. But look at the variety of species in there and look at the way it's kind of arranged itself in terms of height. If you think about how you could, what you could plant to mimic something like this, there's several different species of evergreens. There's a birch. I believe this is sheep laurel. This picture was taken quite a long time ago. There's all kinds of sedges and grasses in the front. This is the kind of place where you'll see little blue stem in the wild because it's so hot. It's just tough. The soil is bad and it's very dry. That's the kind of site that it likes. But you could do something like this in the middle of a lawn with some evergreens of different shapes. These trees all have different textures. There's something else back here, which might well be, it's probably not another birch. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is back there, but it's just, I think, a fantastic, with the rocks, I think it's a fantastic variety of nature and a great way to, a great thing to mimic to design a garden. Similarly, this picture, which I believe was taken along the Appalachian Trail, again, I think along the AT in Vernon, New Jersey. And you can see that these plants are just coming up in spring. You can see there's a lot of, there's still a lot of light because the trees haven't leafed out yet. So there's a lot of moss here. So this would be a great model for a site that was extremely shady, where the moss, a lot of people complain because the moss grows. Well, the moss grows because it's shady and it's good at growing. It's growing in shade. So if you have a shady site, moss is a great thing to have. So you could take this as a model for a very, very shady area. I think I should have made notes at the time about what these were. But I want to say it's Dutchman's Britches, and it's possible that it is. I'm not sure, but you can see that there is, in addition to the moss, there are a couple of other low-growing plants, probably spring ephemerals, and then there are both big and small trees, and it's a great. I think it's a great model for a garden. These two are a little more fun. The picture on the left was taken in the Galapagos, and the picture on the right was taken, I believe, at the Huntington Garden in Pasadena, California. So totally different ecosystems from what we have. But this is what's coming out of rough volcanic soil after a volcano has probably covered, probably volcanic ash and lava has probably covered this area maybe 10 years before, and this is what's growing up. But look at the variety of plants in here. And look at how look at how they're kind of sprawling over the rocks. You could design a beautiful rock garden that would look very much like this. And similarly here, what I like about this is that there are such great diversity of foliage in these plants. So you've got a grass, and again, I don't know what these plants are. You've got a grass, which is the major plant. This is probably a very dry site. So if you have a really dry, sunny site, you can do a grass as the major plant, is the most important plant, and you could fill in with just a couple of other plants that are strongly sculptural to make the eye, to make it interesting for the eye. Again, very small spaces, great diversity of plantings, and I think great design ideas for our area, even though these are not our area, most definitely. So with that, that is my last slide, and I am happy to take your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elaine. That was really wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And as I answered a few questions about the availability of the presentation, it will be on the Native Plant Society of New Jersey website. And if you go to the events tab, you can scroll down and you'll find the webinar there.
As soon as Mike puts it up, which I'm sure will be pretty soon.
Yeah, it won't be probably tonight, but give them a couple of days. So let's go to some of the other questions I was able to answer rather quickly, but I'm going to let you answer these. So we have two that are specific to planting. Someone wants to know what to do with your plants in the terracotta pots in the wintertime.
Oh, you leave them there. Just leave them there. They're fine. As I said, the pots are much more likely to suffer damage than the plants are.
That's right. And do you need to use special potting soil for container gardens?
What I use is I try to avoid anything that has fertilizer in it. I don't like to use synthetic fertilizers. So I try to avoid anything made by Miracle-Gro, and excuse me, but I don't use anything that they make. I look for a potting soil that also doesn't have peat moss in it, because it's very bad for the environment to peatlands are a carbon sink. So to dig them up for potting soil is very destructive. So I try to use things that don't have peat moss in them. And aside from that, when you look at the label, you should be able to read all the words. It's going to have maybe 10% compost, and they don't need a lot of they don't need a lot of nutrition. If you find that they do need nutrition, you can always feed the plants.
Okay.
But I'm really not fussy about potting soil. Coast of Maine makes good potting soils. There are that they do use peat. I do try to find peat-free potting soil mixes and natural ones.
Okay, great. Good to know. Can you explain the recommendation to crowd plants? How does this work from an ecological perspective?
From an ecological perspective, that's how plants grow.
Okay.
They like each other and they grow. Some people talk about the sociability of plants, that some are more social than others, but plants, I mean, you'll never, if you're walking along a trail in a forest somewhere, whether they're native or invasive plants, there's still going to be plants everywhere. They grow close together. That's how nature does it. So that's how I do it. I think plants just grow better when they grow with each other. And I do try to plant things that would grow in the same environment in nature. Of course, always, you're not going to put a dry loving plant in a plant that loves dry sun and a plant that loves moist shade in the same pot, or in the same garden for that matter.
Right.
So. Yeah.
Okay, and another person asked, for gardens against the house, I think you need to make sure to leave space, especially if shrubs are closest to the
Yeah,
foundation. What
it's
do
a
you
very good idea to do that. I generally leave a couple of feet at least from what I think will be the maximum growth of the shrub. Not from where it's planted, but from where I think the shrub will grow, because you do want to be able to get into the back behind the shrubs. Yeah,
Right, okay.
it's a
Another
good point.
person didn't care for that tree stump. They thought it was a little unattractive. And why wouldn't you plant plants that cover that stump?
Well, you could if you wanted to. I don't have a problem with the tree stump. If you don't like it, then plant taller plants around it. That stump, that I think the picture that I showed you of that island, that kidney-shaped island, was probably taken in early spring when the plants hadn't grown up yet. When it's grown up, I think that picture is on the front of the program. Is on the very front of the program, the first slide of that same island in summer. I know I use a picture of that somewhere. No, it's not. I'm sorry. But in the summertime, when those plants have grown up, it's mostly surrounded by mountain mint, and they're the same height as that stump. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, if you don't like the stump, you obviously would cover it. You could put a pot on top of it. You could put vines growing up it if you don't like it, sure. Hmm. That's an
Um,
aesthetic decision.
right. And the next couple of questions are about the mulch. Someone asked, mulch is in shredded bark. I understand that wood chips are best. They allow water and air to penetrate better than shredded bark and also enable mycorrhizae to develop.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, but I don't think let's put it this way. This is what I learned in horticulture school. This is how I've always done it. It works very well. The shredded bark breaks down very quickly. It is more expensive than wood chips. And also what a lot of um, garden companies want to do is they want to give you shredded wood rather than shredded bark these days, because it's cheaper. I try to hold out for the shredded bark, cedar or hemlock. There are studies on both sides. Yes, the mycorrhizae grow in the wood chips. They also grow in the bark. But it's not the same mycorrhizae you would have if you had a tree growing. It's not the same thing. It's I think it's kind of a moot point, and all I can tell you is that it works very well. For a small garden, I greatly prefer it. I personally have never used wood chips. I do know people who have done it very successfully. What you want is a mulch that's going to break down quickly, because you really don't want mulch at all. You want the plants to cover the ground, because then they will seed. Then you will get a natural understory, like things like violets and cinquefoil will fill in, if you're lucky, that are native plants that you won't see, but they'll be holding the soil. So you want that mulch to break down really quickly. You don't want to put down a layer of cardboard and then 6 inches of wood chips, which is what I think is recommended these days. You never want to put down anything that's that thick. You want it to go away, and you never want to remulch. You want the plants to cover the ground so thickly that you won't need any mulch afterwards. It's a lot less trouble to not have to be putting down mulch every year.
Okay, and I think then you've already answered the next question about lasagna, gardening, sheet mulching. Yeah, you've covered that.
All I can say is I don't recommend it. This is something that has taken on a life of its own. I think mostly on the internet. It's something that arose since I graduated from horticulture school, which is less than 10 years ago. So it's just, I don't know where it came from, but it's not what people like Larry Weiner and Benjamin Vogt recommend.
Okay. Another person asks, can native plant seeds be grown and nurtured in a cold frame?
Well, what they want is the cold. The purpose of a cold frame is to warm things up. It captures the heat. Native plant seeds, for the most part, need the cold. It's called stratification. They need a cold period before they can germinate. So you generally want to sow them like now around this time of year. I'm going to be running, by the way, a workshop at the Tilke Arboretum in Glen Rock on seed sowing on January 26th, and that is on the website of the Tilke Arboretum, or will be very, very soon. That you'll get seeds and soil and flats to grow them in. So what you generally do is you plant in flats. People use the milk jugs. You can plant in a pot. It really doesn't matter what you plant in, but you want to keep that plant outside in the cold and in the shade. When spring comes, when things start to warm up, you move those plants up out into the light. Either partial shade or full sun as they need, as they start to germinate. But native plants, think about what nature does. The seed has to survive a cold winter. What that translates into is the seed needs the cold winter. It can't germinate until after the cold winter. So you don't want to plant native plant seeds in a delicate environment like a cold frame, and you don't want to put them in lights in your basement or in a heating mat and under lights like you would with tomato seeds, say, which are tropical plants.
Right. Okay, yes, and you just answered some additional questions. Yes, I highly recommend for anyone who's interested to join your talk and presentation on winter sowing. Done that myself, and it works very well. It's easy peasy. Okay, another one asks, do you have a suggestion for replacing chameleon plant, preferably without herbicide, with native plants?
I'm not sure what chameleon plant is. So is it like a ground cover?
They give a Latin name, Hutania cordata.
I'm going to turn to my other computer and Google it real fast. As you could do another one in the meantime.
Okay. Are there resources you suggest for learning more about what native plants work well together from a design perspective? Appreciate you sharing some examples in your presentation.
Okay. Chameleon plant. Yeah, okay, it's a shade plant. Okay, chameleon plant is a shade lover, it seems. There are, depending on whether you have wet shade or dry shade, there was a slide about that. And if you're trying to replace I would assume this is an aggressive non-native. I'm not familiar with it. I would assume it's aggressive. So some aggressive natives for shade are Pachyra aurea, which I mentioned, which I talked about at length because I just love it. And there's another one, the Canada anemone, Anemone canadensis, which really can cover ground. That's something that can crowd out other things. So I would recommend, those are often recommended in areas where invasives have been removed. Okay.
Okay.
This says moist, shady locations, so I would think that the Pachyra aurea would be a good thing for that. There also are some ferns that travel nicely. All the ferns in like cinnamon fern and the ferns in that family, they all they travel by rhizomes. They spread by rhizomes. I would imagine they would be helpful in a situation like that too. So look up, what you want to do is look up native plants for moist shade. It looks like it's a plant that likes moist shade.
Okay.
I'm
And
sorry, what was the next one?
the native plants that work well together, a resource,
Okay,
plants that work well
yeah,
together from a design perspective.
yeah. Yeah, this is sort of intuitive design knowledge. It's easier to find native plants that work well together from an ecological perspective. There are lots of resources on that. I can't think offhand of a source about native plants that work well together from a design perspective. There is a great book on design with native plants by Carolyn Summers. She's going to be our speaker next month, although she's not going to talk about this, but it's about creating gardens of different styles with native plants. If somebody could, let me see if I can find her, the exact title of the book. Yeah, it's called Designing Gardens with Flora of the American East. And I believe a new edition has just come out. It's an excellent book about design with native plants. So in other words, if you want to create an English cottage garden or a Japanese garden or, you know, a particular style of garden using native plants, that's what this book is about. I can't think of something, you know, there are basic design principles. You want to use color in certain ways. You want to use height in certain ways. You want to think in terms of what, you know, of what blooms when. And you have to think about all these different things when you're designing a garden. And I can't think offhand of that kind of a resource. If anybody else can, please put it in the chat.
Okay. And someone is asking again about the seed planting workshop. I know that's January 26th. I'm among the,
It's not on the website yet.
yes.
It's going to be at the Tilke Arboretum in Glen Rock, and that is spelled Thielke, Tilke Arboretum.
Do you know what time?
It's going to be, I believe, 10:30 in the morning, on Sunday, January 26th.
All right. And is registration,
You
pre-registration?
will, yeah, and there's a small fee and registration is required, and it's only going to be 15 people, I think.
Okay.
So that should be up on their website within a couple of days. Excuse me.
Okay. Lots of thank yous for your presentation. And I think that wraps up our Q&A.
Great, great. Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome. And for anyone who's still on in the chat, we've listed the Native Plant Society website. You can click on that link. And Mike added one from Rutgers about designing gardens. So that could be helpful.
There are a lot of workshops. There are a lot of different workshops about design with native plants. If you, you know, I've taught it myself for the Native Plant Society. But there are lots and lots of workshops. Benjamin Vogt, VOGT, does workshops online all the time. There are the ones from New Directions in American Landscaping. There are just lots and lots of them. A lot of arboretums do workshops. If you keep your eyes open, you'll see these things.
Right. Okay. Not to put you on the spot, but Joanne, do you have anything to add about the upcoming walk on February 1st?
Okay, we're
Maybe kind of listening if not, but
yeah,
anyway,
okay. We may yeah, we are we have tentatively scheduled a walk at the Celery Farm led by Mike Lefebvre on Saturday, February 1st. We don't have the time yet, but we will be sending out a constant contact about that when everything is settled. We also have, as we said, Carolyn Summers speaking on February 12th at this same time. And the information about the Native Plant Society of New Jersey annual meeting will be up very soon. That's on March 1st.
Okay. Okay. I think that
Great.
wraps
Thanks
it up.
again, Tanya. This is great.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay.
Good night.
I think